Hello and welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers, and you are in Season 4 of Wrestling at Random, which, if you've listened to this season, you've heard us say time and time and time again. The theme is more wrestling, all caps, and that has been the case. The randomizer contains more different wrestling from all over the world, from the entire space-time continuum than ever before. And this is another indication of that, as for the first time in the free feed, the randomizer has pulled Wrestling from the Chase, the St. Louis wrestling territory. I think one of our blind spots, I think both of us, as far as watching full shows or full matches, other than just seeing clips. We did have some Wrestling from the Chase action in the bonus feed quite a while back, but outside of that, that's the only Wrestling from the Chase we've seen. So this... when the randomizer pulled us, I was pretty excited to see what we're going to get, mostly because first thing we're going to get is the boys are back in town.
Oh, before we get into the show, we've got a little bit of stuff to talk about, because you're mentioning randomizers and what's going on. We've got new listeners, and we need to catch people up real quick on what the randomizer is, what we do here. We take all of the internet's wrestling content. You said more wrestling. We put all the wrestling in there. We fired it up, and it will randomly pick a show for us to watch. We watch it and review it every week. And here it picked St. Louis Wrestling from the Chase. You mentioned the last time we watched it was on our bonus feed, because we have a Patreon. That's the best way to support the show, patreon.com/wrestling at random. There we do bonus episodes every single week, in addition to the episode you're getting in the free feed, something completely different over there in the bonus content. If you're an Apple Podcast subscriber, you can hit the big subscribe button right there in your Apple Podcasts podcatcher, and it will unlock all of the bonus episodes right here in the same feed that you're listening to the free content in. Now, episode 79 of the bonus content. That means we've done, if you're listening in linear fashion, well over 100 episodes over there in the bonus content right now. All of that is available to you. And the last time was episode 79, first time here on the free feed. Because it's the first time in a territory, let's catch up. I pulled up Dave Meltzer's Wrestling Observer newsletters to read a little bit about Wrestling at the Chase. I'm going to talk a little bit about it here. Let me tell you a little bit about Wrestling at the Chase. It debuted on KPLR TV in 1959. Sam Mushnick is the promoter, and he was apparently one of the best paying promoters in North America. Mushnick paid 32% of the gate revenue to the talent, usually split up as 16% of the gate to the main event, and dividing the other 16% for the rest of the card. With the possible exception of Madison Square Garden, St. Louis was generally the best city for pay when it came to headliners. When they did a big house, the pay was better than a Madison Square Garden main event because of those higher percentages.
Wow.
The show welcomes us with the tones of Thin Lizzy's The Boys Are Back in Town, like you mentioned, Adam.
I could not contain my excitement. What a perfect way to open a professional wrestling show in the 1980s. Certainly not the only promotion.
And timeless, sir. It is timeless way to open up a show.
You're saying that should open up Dynamite, AEW Dynamite. In
that's
time.
Way better than the current Dynamite theme song in 2023.
That is indisputable fact.
And then another great sound. It's Larry Matzik. He's welcoming us to the show. He's our host. He's the main play-by-play guy. He runs down the card. Let's catch you up a little bit about Larry Matzik. He started as a TV announcer February 26th, 1972 for the Wrestling at the Chase show. So he's 9 years into his tenure at the time of this episode we're watching. Eventually, Sam Mushnick officially made him co-booker in the late 70s, working with Pat O'Connor. Matzik worked there until going to work for Vince McMahon after the St. Louis territory closed. He worked for Vince in the WWF from 1984 to 1993.
Wow, I didn't realize he was there that long.
No, me neither. Apparently the relationship was always strained because the two had a different philosophy of wrestling. At one point, when ratings started declining in St. Louis, Vince McMahon came up with the idea that instead of using WWF announcers, they would send the tapes in St. Louis and have Matisic, known in town as the wrestling announcer, they would have him do the voiceovers of the WWF product. Only in the St. Louis market.
What time period was that in? I'd be fascinated to hear those tapes.
Yeah, so that's in that mid '80s time period. So definitely would love to hear that. He hated when he'd go out in public and people would talk about how great wrestling used to be and how bad it had become. Instead of the constant praise and excitement he was used to, he was in the role of an apologist, saying that the philosophies were different, but they were also a very successful organization. Eventually, they decided against continuing with Matisic as an announcer, and finally, ratings continued to fall under McMahon until KPLR-TV canceled wrestling altogether.
The thing I'll say about Larry Matisic as an announcer is that he doesn't have that great classic wrestling announcer voice like a Gordon Soley or like some of the other guys we've talked about, but he is tremendous at laying out the scene, telling us how, telling the fans how how they got to a certain point, what's coming up. Really, really effective in that role. And if he wasn't the booker here in 1981, he basically announces like, in some ways to me, it kind of is reminiscent of hearing Bill Watts on Mid-South, where you get a real strong sense that this guy isn't just coming into the studio and calling what he's seeing. He has an idea of where things are going. He's trying to get, certain things over as a result.
Yeah, he definitely was here. And yeah, I could see how, if you grew up with him being your wrestling announcer, he would be in that league of Gordon Soley and Jim Ross for sure. And he leads us into our opening match. Gene Lewis versus Tim Leonard in the Curtain Raiser here at the Chase Hotel.
Larry Matisic refers to it as the Curtain Raiser. We have the ring announcer, Mickey Garagiola is the ring announcer here. He introduces, as you mentioned, Gene Lewis and Tim Leonard. Gene Lewis has a black 80s singlet. Think a much smaller version of King Kong Bundy, but with hair. Tim Leonard has just regular gray trunks on. As you mentioned, Larry Matisic is running down the card, both in the opening segment and here during this match. And he mentions that we will see Kerry Von Erich in action later and says that Kerry Von Erich is only 20 years old here in 1981.
This is true. I looked it up, and he is 20 years old. And yeah, Larry spends this match having a podcast talking about Kerry Von Erich and why we should care about the main event of this show. Totally. Yes. And that's totally fine because there's nothing here. I love matches where I think someone is the jobber, but I don't know who the jobber is, and we're going to find out as we go.
The answer is both are, but one will win. This reminded me of when they would do the Underdog Challenge on WCW Saturday nights, where it would be like Mark Starr against Frankie Lancaster or Bob Cook against Pez Whatley. That's what this feels like here with Gene Lewis and Tim Leonard. It's just a lot of pretty basic mat work. At one point early on, Larry Matisic refers to Tim Leonard as young Tim Leonard and says that he's an exciting prospect. This man looks no younger than 35 years old.
We've talked about that in a lot of the 80s programming we've reviewed. I don't know if we gave the date of this show off the top.
I don't believe you did.
August 2nd, 1981. So we are right in that sweet spot of the 80s where I think the entire decade where people looked no less than 15 years older than their actual age.
Absolutely
except for
true.
Kerry Von Erich.
It's very sad here because Tim Leonard, I just checked Cage Match and there's no actual listing for him. Like there's matches, but you can't click on them. However, what was the date that you again said this show was?
August 2nd, 1981. We found, we being the randomizer, pulled this off of YouTube at the time of the recording. Some of the some of the stuff that's not owned by WWE at the time of this recording. So it's available on YouTube, August 2nd, 1981.
Take a guess as to who on the following week's episode, August 9th, 1981, Wrestling at the Chase, who did Tim Leonard wrestle?
No idea. Who was it?
J.J. Dillon.
Which is funny because J.J. Dillon we saw wrestle in the bonus content. He was on that show. Yes. We also had Ric Flair and Pat O'Connor on that same show as well. So here, the Tim Leonard, he hit the first big move of the match. He hit a crossbody, and I'm like, oh, maybe Leonard is the star of this match.
You're trying to sleuth this out. Who's the winner? Who's the loser?
Lewis, he had a hold on Leonard's arm. He got to a rope break. Larry Matzik says he could have had a double toe hold, and I want to know what that would be.
Well, what I want to know is, does that mean you are grabbing the toes of 2 feet, or are you isolating 2 individual toes on 1 foot? It's important information.
We never got any additional detail on what a double toe hold could have been.
You know what we did get, though? This is right at the point in the match. A hideous backdrop from Tim Leonard, who is blown up to a ridiculous degree at this point. He's not like a big guy, but he is completely gassed here, which he shouldn't be considering he's such a young up-and-coming prospect. He should have a full tank of fuel here in his body, but he does not.
No, this was Lewis continuing to work over the arm. They traded forearms. That hideous backdrop barely got a 1 count, thank goodness. Lewis catches a crossbody attempt, hits a backbreaker, and then Lewis with a full Boston Crab for the submission victory. Leonard, the up-and-coming prospect, he was the jobber the whole time.
Yes.
As Gene Lewis is your winner.
No reaction to anything in this match. As you said, this served solely, it basically functioned to be Larry Matzik doing the world's first podcast.
We are then told Ric Flair has something to say. We go to a Ric Flair promo. Let's hear Ric Flair, and then we'll describe what he looked like when he gave this.
St. Louis is the place. Now, not only is this a match for the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship, it's a match that the world has wanted to see for a long time. Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair. Now, Rhodes, I have chased you. I have humiliated you. I have called you every name. Every derogatory name there is. And finally, only because you're the NWA champion, and only because Sam Mushnick and every other promoter in the world that's tried to put this together has come to me. You and I. You're wearing something that you call the People's Championship belt. The most prestigious gold belt in the world today. Well, that's not the People's belt. That belt was custom made for Ric Flair. Harley Race has been wearing it around. That's been a joke. And now you wearing it around is even a bigger joke. Because that belt was made, designed for the one and only. Who wears all the gold and all the jewelry? Who wears custom-made clothes? Who dates any woman he wants to on any night of the week? On any week of the month? On any month of the year? Ric Flair. And you know why? Because Ric Flair, he'd be a dude. He'd be a legend. He'd be the most gorgeous human being on the face of this earth. He'd be anything he wants to be. Because he's the greatest wrestler in the world today. And that's why I can do anything I want to do. When you're bad, brother, you're bad. And I'm the baddest, best wrestler in the world today. My beautiful blonde hair blowing in the breeze, my $5,000, $6,000, $8,000 robes, my limousines, and yes, the 7th, I'm going to pull up one of my limousines. I don't want any little punk kids touching it. I don't want any of you girls touching my clothes. I don't want any of you running your fingers through my hair. We're their own business. The Nature Boy coming to St. Louis. I'm going to be the NWA champion. I am going to be the NWA champion. Rhodes, that is bad news for you. St. Louis, the 7th. Flair going to be the champ. Woo!
Flair's got a black eye and bandages on his face.
He is messed up here. He looks like he actually got beat up by the guys that Shawn Michaels claimed to get beat up by outside that bar. He was messed up. That said, as you just heard in the promo, Flair was incredible here. We've had a lot of Ric Flair. You go back to just the most recent episode on the free feed, 1978 Ric Flair from All Japan Pro Wrestling. We talked about how he was on the way to being the fully formed Nature Boy character, but he wasn't quite there yet. He wasn't throwing chops. Here, this is an incredibly effective Ric Flair promo. He's saying all the Ric Flair things, but he's saying them in a more serious
mean guy way.
And he has this great line, which you just heard. He says, again, direct quotes, this is the words he's saying. He be a dude. He be a legend. He be the most gorgeous human being on the face of the earth. Those are the direct quote from Ric Flair. I lost it at this point. I also loved him talking about how he doesn't want any punk kids touching his limousine. What a treasure. What an absolute treasure.
My notes just say Ric Flair, ... caps, he be a dude.
Yes. that I'm not going to lie. He be a dude is going to be in my lexicon for probably the next 6 months, just based off of Ric Flair saying this year. And even more so, saying those ridiculous words, looking the way he did with great clothes on, long blonde hair, bleach blonde hair, but his face just an absolute mess. Like he looked like he'd been through a 5-round heavyweight UFC war.
When we start selling additional T-shirts and merch, there will be a "He Be a Dude" shirt that's coming soon.
Yes.
So we go back to the ring, and we get Adam's aunt, Carol Summers, in the ring.
Different spelling. She's
okay.
It's spelled more like Doug Summers, but 2 M's instead of 1. Sommers. And it's Carol Summers and Jill Fontaine taking on the team of Wendy Richter and stealth favorite of the podcast, Joyce Grable.
Joyce Grable. There's nothing stealth about my love of Joyce Grable. I finished watching this match. We'll go through it here, but I finished watching this match, and I literally almost texted you to say, Joyce Grable's my favorite women's wrestler of all time. Of all time.
Certainly of the 80s.
Some of the women of stardom aside.
Yes.
Joyce Grable's incredible. We don't talk enough about how great she is and the cool stuff she does and how good she is at her job. We saw Joyce Grable and Wendy Richter in the free feed. If you go back to an AWA Super Sunday show from 1983.
1983.
If you go back very early, season 1, I think.
Yes.
We saw Joyce Grable and Wendy Richter for the very first time with no expectations, and they blew our minds. We were shocked at the things we saw. We were so impressed, over the top. Every time we see Joyce Grable, she never disappoints. So here, I'm seeing Joyce Grable on my screen, and I have the opposite. I have high expectations now because we saw her the first time we saw her, no expectations, blown away. Now expectations are high. I can't wait to see what Joyce Grable and Wendy Richter bring to this match. Hell yeah. I'm excited. She's my favorite women's wrestler. I'm going out I'm saying it now. She's my favorite. And this match all it did was cement her as her being my favorite wrestler.
She's fantastic. She's, for lack of a better term, such a great mean guy. And she's also, the way you put, she's so effective at what she does. The character she is, what she is trying to portray, she is in it. She is living it 110% the whole time. And not only does she look great, she's so good at making her opponent look great. Like when the
boy,
time
do you see that here. Wow.
Yeah, when the time calls for her to just be mean and nasty and dominating people, she does that. When the time comes for her to look like a total fool and fall on her face, she does that. When the time comes for her to just go back and forth 50-50 with somebody, she does that well. Like she is, again, in an era where women's matches were largely considered and presented as a joke, and there was really no emphasis put on or importance put on like actually having a good match. She made an actual effort to do so.
Yeah, and what a job she did here. Great forearm shot to start the match, and they are working over Carol Summers. A front face lock by Grable, and she's got the front face lock on. She takes the opportunity to pull the hair of Summers, cheating for no reason, which I love when heels do that in the 80s. Richter's leaning over the top rope from the apron to yell at her partner. And Jill Fontaine out on the other side of the apron runs over, shakes the ropes, and Richter falls in, and the crowd is amused. They're having a good time.
This is great. It was a perfect example of kind of the two elements of Grable and even Richter as a team as well. It's also interesting to see Wendy Richter as a rugged heel here, considering what she would be a few years later in the WWF. You mentioned that front face lock, though. What made this even better is in 1983, she goes full Zack Sabre Jr., halfway into this front chancery, she transitions and hammerlocks her own arm behind her back and hooks it into her other arm to make it a more aggressive version of the front chancery. Again, like we saw in 83 with a few things in that AWA match. Here in 1981, she's doing some crazy stuff that you weren't seeing anyone in the U.S. doing, much less in a women's match in the early 80s.
No, this was so much fun. You get Richter putting Summers in the tree of woe in their corner. Grable's choking her on the outside from the apron. They're roughing her up. If you've only seen that WWF 80s babyface Wendy Richter run, you're missing out, because you wouldn't see her here and be like, wow, she should be the top babyface of a national expansion. She's a great heel.
It's so weird. It's the reverse of watching babyface Dick Slater in the WWF. It's that same like, this doesn't really work, but it actually does. This is weird. I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah, we've got Summers has been nowhere near a tag.
No. For
6 minutes of this match. We're 6 minutes in. She has not even sniffed her side of the ring.
This is the opposite of, if you're listening in linear fashion, last week's episode of the podcast where the Rock and Roll Express and the Mod Squad, where we had 15 teased Ricky Morton hot tags to Robert Gibson that got cut off every time. They're not even bothering with that here. It's just total domination.
After commercial, Fontaine is in with Grable. She hits a crossbody for 2. And now this is where you mention how she makes her opponents look better, because Fontaine gets in there with Richter and everything falls apart.
Yes.
Fontaine was not good. She did hit one nice-looking shotgun dropkick, but the rest of this was a mess. Fontaine misses a splash on Richter, and this was a fun sequence where Grable runs in illegally, tries to splash, and also misses. Summers runs in. She misses a splash attempt on Grable. All 4 women are down.
This is a total lucha spot here in 1981 women's wrestling at Wrestling in the Chase. We then have we've got a do-si-do spot, and then there's a second ref shows up to determine who is legal in the match. What? I love it. Jim Ross would love it more than anybody in 2023, but I was not expecting this bonus ref to determine who's legal.
After Richter and Grable both miss drop kicks, they roll outside to take a break and regroup. Back inside, they start double teaming Fontaine. Grable starts beating her down, and it's awesome. But it's too short as Fontaine slips between Grable's legs and makes the tag to Summers. Summers comes in. Grable tries to bail her out of the way, but she cartwheels free, hits a drop kick. Grable sidesteps another drop kick, and they hit the backdrop into a powerbomb combo, the thing that blew our minds in 1983. They did it in 1981 in St. Louis, even earlier than we had thought.
Completely shocking. This is the Faces of Fear finisher in late 90s WCW. The throw back body drop into a powerbomb double T move. As you mentioned, again, we have to reiterate, in a 1981 women's match at Wrestling in the Chase. Absolutely shocking. I'll tell you a quick aside, what wasn't shocking was when Jill Fontaine went for the standing babyface splash and missed. Wendy Richter got the knees up. So if I had a board of how many times we've seen that on an 80s, 90s, or even modern wrestling show on this podcast, I'd be several pages in. But yeah, that backdrop powerbomb combo in 1981, what in the world? Like if you saw that in 1981 in women's wrestling in Japan, it would have been shocking. But here in the U.S., it's mind-blowing.
And I'm trying to remember Rod Trongard's reaction in the AWA yes. versus Larry Matzik. Larry Matzik went nuts. This guy was paying attention to the women's match. He was in it and was blown away by this finish, as we all were, as anyone who was watching this in 81 should have been as well. Just absolutely nuts. Joyce Grable, my favorite women's wrestler. So this was tremendous.
You mentioned Larry Matzik. I thought, and we'll get to it throughout the show, I thought he was great on the show. He doesn't have the classic like authoritative voice, meaning the actual sound of his voice of a Gordon Soley or a Lance Russell, or even in his own way like a Jim Ross, but in understanding what an announcer's job is and understanding pro wrestling, getting things over, he's one of the best we've heard on this podcast. He's fantastic.
Yeah, so good. And he did a great job catching you up. If you didn't know 20-year-old Kerry Von Erich, you sure did by the time this next match came up. The main event, Ken Patera taking on Kerry Von Erich. And he's young here. He's skinnier than you remember Kerry. We did see Kerry Von Erich as a Missouri champion, yes. I believe, in against Greg the Hammer Valentine over on the bonus feed in the best of Greg Valentine curated list we watched.
It goes from 1982, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. And then we also saw him in one of the very first episodes of this podcast from a show in Dallas from 1983. And it is striking, as you said. It's Kerry Von Erich in more of the shape that you would think of Kevin Von Erich being in the later years, where he's big, but he's not just a massive hulking brute. And to your point earlier, he's a 20-year-old who actually looks like a 20-year-old in 1981, unlike so many of the other people that we see where they're like 20 and they look 40.
The rest of the people.
Yes.
The rest of the people of the 80s.
Of the earth in the 80s.
Yes, exactly. Go look up, if you don't know what we're talking about. Go look up the ages of the Traveling Wilburys and go look up the ages of the cast of Cheers.
That's the one.
From 1986, 87. Go look up the ages of the cast of Cheers, and you just think back to your parents' friends. They were all like 30, even though in your mind they all looked 60. Yeah, so here, Kerry Von Erich, the only person of the 80s to look his age, taking on Ken Patera, who, while still jacked and known as the strong man here, I felt he got bigger as years went on. 1981, he was a little more lean.
Here, he's a power lifter. You know, he does not look like any way, shape, or form like a bodybuilder body. He's a big, but not overly big power lifter type of body. He also just looks different. He has long bleach blonde hair. He's wearing a singlet. He almost physically looks more like a jacked up Ric Flair than Ken Patera. Kerry Von Erich in pink tights, as we mentioned. Both guys in great shape, nowhere near as big as they would be later. We find out that not only will Ric Flair be facing Dusty Rhodes for the NWA World title on an upcoming show at the Kiel Auditorium, we'll also have Ken Patera. Ken Patera against Jack Briscoe is one of the big matches on the show. I just can't fathom how that match would look. And then an incredible tag team match. It is Baron Von Raschke and Dick Murdoch taking on the team of Dick the Bruiser and Kerry Von Erich. Dick the Bruiser and Kerry Von Erich. Incredible.
Who knew the randomizer was making matches in St. Louis at that time?
Very true.
Kerry with a headlock, and Patera just picks him up and throws him off, showing off his power early.
I loved also how at the very beginning, Patera is daring Kerry Von Erich to basically dive in with the single leg takedown, with the idea being that Ken Patera is coming off a knee injury, and so he's daring Kerry Von Erich to test it.
Patera poses. Kerry wastes no time interrupting the pose with a dropkick. Another dropkick from Kerry, and Patera bails outside the ring to regroup.
Crowd erupts. The crowd loves Kerry. The other person who loves Kerry is Larry Madison. He's going as crazy as the crowd is here. He's fantastic. Go Kerry, go chants. It's so interesting because I think people generally that, if you didn't grow up in that time period, or maybe even if you did and you just grew up in Dallas, you think of the Von Erichs as the Dallas megastars, the gods in Dallas, Texas, but you don't think of them as being big stars outside of there. But what we saw from that match against Greg the Hammer Valentine in the cage, that huge crowd with Kerry Von Erich, or seeing him here as well, he's every bit as over here as he would be in the Sportatorium or Reunion Arena.
100%. His what makes him there's an alternative universe that he's a world champion and one of the biggest stars.
He's Hulk Hogan in an alternate universe.
Yeah, 100%. He had it all, and he did get, with his brother dying, he did get his brief win of the championship, but never, with his foot injuries and his drug issues and the other issues around with the family, that it never materialized. But man, you see all the potential in the world in a 20-year-old Kerry here.
It's incredible.
Patera with a headlock. Kerry starts to power out. Patera panics that someone is overpowering him, and he just pulls the hair of Kerry to regain the advantage.
I also love, in the commentary, we have Larry Madison talking about how athletes in other sports cheat. You win any way you can. He starts talking about like how you cheat in hockey, how you cheat in baseball, how you cheat in basketball. Very good. And again, he's almost entirely by himself calling these matches. There's a few times where after the introductions, Mickey Garagiola will inject with a sentence or two, but otherwise it's all Larry Madison the whole time. And he's doing a great job. He says that Kerry Von Erich's agility is unnerving Patera, in addition to, as you said, his power unnerving Patera, who's so used to having the power advantage all the time.
Kerry picks Patera up. Patera, not a small man, picks him up, puts him seated onto the top rope. Kerry starts to back away from the corner, and Patera jumps off the middle rope, nailing Kerry with a forearm. Patera gets a 2, and Kerry reverses a whip, and Patera ends up going chest first into the buckles. Bret Hart, he is not in taking this turnbuckle chest first.
No, the angle and position that he took it was Bret Hart style, but the trajectory and the velocity, certainly not.
Kerry can't follow up, though, and Patera's right back on him for a suplex, another 2 count. After commercial, Kerry's working over the leg of Patera. Patera rolls over, throws some punches to break the hold, tosses Kerry to the outside. Kerry's on the floor. Patera follows him out and hits an atomic drop on the floor. Like that would make it worse. That's some of the psychology things. That's wrestling physics that's ridiculous.
It's like putting a submission hold out on the floor, or like you would see on Monday Night Raw. I remember several times where like Chris Jericho put the walls of Jericho on Triple H desk. On the announce table, as if that was somehow going to hurt more. This is sort of the same thing. I guess maybe the atomic drop, as you are dropping the person down, your foot is hitting the concrete floor, and maybe the impact of your foot hitting the concrete floor travels back up your shin into your knee, into the posterior of your opponent, therefore making the atomic drop more lethal. Probably not, though.
After trading punches on the floor, both men roll back in to beat the count. Patera misses a couple elbow drops, misses a punch, and Kerry's on the apron. He puts a sleeper on Patera, who's in the ring, while Kerry's standing on the apron.
Minoru Suzuki style here from Kerry Von Erich.
Kerry lets him go, leaps back into the ring over the top rope, and goes to put on the Iron Claw. We get the 1 minute remaining call from the announcer. Patera's using all his power to keep Kerry from locking in the claw. Patera misses a charge into the corner, a sunset flip. We get a 2 count. Patera with a small package for a 2 count.
Yeah, the pace has really picked up here in the last minute.
Yeah, it's all a flurry of near falls in the final minute until the time expires and we get a time limit draw.
Yeah, we had an Oklahoma roll by Kerry Von Erich right as the time limit expired, so nobody wins. And in the words of Larry Matisic, a slam-bang time limit draw. And I have to agree, this was a really fun match for what it was. Young Kerry Von Erich showing the best of what Kerry Von Erich could be. Ken Patera, who I really never had any time for, was perfectly acceptable, totally fine in this match. And yeah, good main event. I guess we still have more to come on the show, but that clearly was the advertised main event at least.
Yeah, and think about 1981, how often you didn't get competitive matches on television, right? So this was a competitive time limit draw main event. This is, it's not, most of the wrestling shows were squash matches, and you would see showcases for guys. And if you want to see him take on this other guy, you got to go to the arena to see that. Here it was almost the, wow, if only they had more time. They'll have more time at the arena. Go to the arena to see it as a commercial for actually what you'll get to see. This was a tremendous and just a special, this territory putting on competitive matches is something that is a differentiator from a lot of the other territories we've seen.
For sure. And it was this territory, and Sam Mushnick is the promoter, it was definitely more of a sports-based presentation. Yes, you had, Ric Flair come in. We'll talk about the Dusty Rhodes promo momentarily, but you had more competitive matches, less ridiculousness, and that's reflected in the fact that we had a 10-minute draw. Yeah, we didn't have a winner, but we also didn't have a count out or disqualification or a guy just leave the ring. It was a straightforward, pretty high octane match for the time period. Good stuff. We then go to Dusty Rhodes,
your NWA World Champion.
Yes,
Dusty Rhodes.
He's in a suit. He has the belt. He says he is braggadocious but thankful. He says, direct quote, he can run like a deer. He has fists like lightning. He's going to boogie down with some electrified funk. But he is saying this in a very calm, understated manner, which is so different from what you would expect from Dusty Rhodes. The other thing that really struck me about this promo is that we're so used to Dusty Rhodes in the mid-'80s, watching those NWA, World Championship Wrestling shows on TBS, where he's clearly positioning himself as the working man wearing the jeans. He's the common man. Here, he's basically saying, I am rich. I have money too. Me versus Ric Flair is money versus money, but I don't forget where I came from, where Ric Flair does forget where he comes from. It's a very different presentation of Dusty Rhodes than we'd see a few years later.
Yeah, it's different in the content that you just described. It's different in the delivery. It's very soft-spoken promo here. It's not crazy Dusty. He does start to ramp himself up by the end, of course, but yeah, he talks about his athletic background, like stuff you don't think about with Dusty Rhodes. Talks about his football background and a bunch of the sports he played. He kept bringing up Ric Flair, and he says it all comes down to Flair versus Rhodes for the NWA World Title. He's going to give Flair the shot. This is a great promo. This is a fantastic job by Dusty.
Tremendous, and in such, as we said, such a different way from what you'd expect, in both in terms of content and delivery. Flair and Dusty Rhodes absolutely talked me into the building. Granted, I would have only been 3 years old, or 3 months old, I should say, at this point, as I was born in 80. I would have been 3 months old, give or take a few weeks. But man, if I had seen this as a kid, old enough to understand what it was, I would have been begging my parents to take me to this show. Flair was Ric Flair, but super intense. Dusty was Dusty Rhodes, but this quiet, understated intensity while also talking about electrified funk. Like, these guys were just, they were incredible. And it also fit their delivery, fit the tone of this type of wrestling show. You also wonder if maybe they dialed things back or did it in a different way on a show like this versus, say, Florida or,
for sure,
or Crockett.
Oh, for sure. These were promos delivered to get you to the match at the Checker Dome to go see these two guys, and they sold it out. Ric Flair's was a big time money draw. Dusty Rhodes a big time money draw in St. Louis because they were so effective. And Sam Mushnick knew his crowd, and he knew. I'm sure he told them, hey, these are some things you should do to be successful. And those guys are just going to execute it and take it to another level. So yeah, tremendous promos all around. I would love to see that match. So if anyone is a patron or thinking about joining the Patreon, you can join, not only get all that bonus content, but you can also, we have a tier there where you can be the randomizer, the intentionalizer, we call it. You can request a show for us to watch as long as it's over 10 years old. We watch it and we review it, and then you can bump yourself back down, continue to get all of that bonus content. If someone wants to, request that we watch Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair for the NWA title, I'm here for it. Find me a link. We will watch it. Bump yourself up to that tier, and we will watch it. We'll review it. You'll hear it in the bonus feed. So I'm putting the call out.
I'm looking at this card right now. I want that to happen. Not only is there Dusty Rhodes, Ric Flair, 2 out of 3 falls for the world title. We mentioned Jack Briscoe, Ken Patera, Dick the Bruiser, and Kerry Von Erich against Dick Murdoch and Baron Von Raschke. There is a match that I am dying to see as I look at this. It's a match that I would not have thought these two would have ever wrestled. David Von Erich against Rocky Johnson.
Oh, yes, please. We love Rocky Johnson on this podcast. He's one of our favorites, and yeah, oh my gosh, I had no idea their paths crossed. Would love to see that. So yeah, I'm putting the call out to people joining the Patreon. Make this happen. We definitely want to see that. We go back to this show, Wrestling at the Chase. We're back at the Chase here. We've seen the main event. We've heard from the NWA champion Dusty Rhodes. What's left? Most falls to curfew match, which is my favorite thing to say. This is it's basically as many pins as you can get, or submission, as many victories as you can get before the show goes off the air.
What it is a TV time remaining Iron Man match.
Iron Man match. Bring this concept back.
Yes. I far prefer this than watching a wrestling show where the main event's going to end at 1 minute before the show ends regardless. This makes it may not make the end of the show as dramatic, and you couldn't do it in a ratings driven era, but from a logic standpoint, it makes so much more sense than the match just magically finishing at the end of the show every week.
In this most falls to curfew match, it's Joe Stark taking on Bulldog Bob Brown.
Oh God, Bulldog Bob Brown.
We are I don't want to speak for you, Adam, but I will say in the matches I've seen Bulldog Bob Brown, I am not Canadian. But the matches I've seen...
In the matches of Bulldog Bob Brown, you are not Canadian, but during every other match you are?
I want to preface my not enjoying him by saying I'm also not Canadian. So, I think there's a difference. If you're Canadian, you might have a different... you might have seen him in more legendary things or whatever.
You're obligated by birthright to be a fan.
Yeah. Here, I've seen enough of him, and I've never been impressed or needing to see more.
My only praise I could give him is he's better than Swede Hansen.
Very much so. Yeah, 100%.
That's it, though. That might be the ultimate damning with faint praise. He's another one of those guys too that always looked like 100 years old. Didn't we see him in a match from 1969 and he was 30 and he looked 80?
Yeah, what else we see is a bunch of weirdos sitting with sunglasses indoors ringside. Who are these guys?
Well,
like
there's a lot of weird stuff going on here. First, Joe Stark looks like a cross between Scott Armstrong and Andy Kaufman. Also, Larry Madison says that Bulldog Bob Brown put Mickey Garagiola in an airplane spin at a celebrity softball game recently. And Bulldog Bob Brown is shouting about this out to Mickey Garagiola, who's out on the floor. Then, as they're continuing to do this slow-paced wrestling, we hear Larry Madison say that Pam, no last name, Pam, came from Pensacola, Florida, all the way to St. Louis, Missouri to watch wrestling at the Chase. And we see her with a bunch of guys wearing sunglasses inside at ringside. What is going on?
These guys, it's not like when you watch 87 World Championship Wrestling and you've got guys dressed in suits with sunglasses like cheering on the Horsemen. That's not this. This is just weirdos wearing sunglasses indoors at ringside.
Very strange. The other strange thing is we move towards the finish of this match. As many positive things as I've said about Larry Madison, the one negative I'll say, the man does not know what a sunset flip is. He calls it a jackknife and cradle hold multiple times on this show, including here in the finish and then on the replay of the finish.
The finish comes with Bulldog Bob Brown giving 3 consecutive leg drops and getting the pin. This was boring, but it was quick, and we're told we're out of time. Only one fall here in this most falls match.
Another minute or two left in the show. It was just like they pulled the plug. Like, yeah, one fall's enough. This is enough. We're instituting the curfew early.
Yes, and they're not wrong to do so because it was boring, and but at least it's over, and they are out of time. The winner of the match, of course, Bulldog Bob Brown. As the show goes off the air, a little more boys are back in town. A little more Thin Lizzy to send you home happy. Your thoughts, Adam? Favorite thing on this show?
It's always hard for me to not say when good Kerry Von Erich shows up because he's my childhood wrestling hero, and I'm always so excited when we get to see again, like we did in the bonus feed with him against Greg Valentine from around the same time. We see good Kerry Von Erich, and you can see what he could be at the height of his powers. But for me, it's that Ric Flair promo. The combination of what he was saying, how he looked when he was saying it, and that we got the line, he be a dude, he be a legend, he be the most gorgeous human being on the face of the earth. It can't be anything other than Ric Flair. We're on a Ric Flair roll, an early Ric Flair roll between the prior episode to this of him in All Japan in 1978 and here in 1981 in St. Louis. I am hyped for that Ric Flair Dusty Rhodes match after this show.
Yeah, I have to agree. That was the best thing on this show. But honorable mention to Joyce Grable and her performance. Tremendous. Just tremendous. Dusty Rhodes with a unique promo as well deserves an honorable mention, of course. Super fun watching Kerry Von Erich do his thing at kind of the peak of his athletic in-ring abilities here. I mean, it's unfortunately almost downhill only for him at that point. But from an in-ring athletic perspective, but no, great. This is a great show. So I've watched 2 episodes of St. Louis Wrestling at the Chase now, and it's a territory that I wouldn't have thought would be one of my favorites. But, man, it is one of my favorite territories. Like Championship Wrestling from Florida, Memphis, Mid-Atlantic, and now St. Louis Wrestling. Those are absolutely my favorite territories.
I would throw Mid-South in there as well for me. But the thing I enjoy about this is it feels so different from particularly Championship Wrestling from Florida and Memphis. Like, it could not be more different than Memphis when you think about how Memphis was such like an episodic, almost the wrestling was non-existent. It was just the stories weaving their way throughout the show. The Jerry Lawler, Bill Dundee stuff that we talked about, and that bonus content episode that made its way to the free feed earlier on in this season, I believe. Whereas this is, you had some very, very good, but lower key promos. Otherwise, it was an in-ring show, but the in-ring was more compelling than, let's say, a WWF show from the same time period, which was also very much in-ring, but the wrestling was so boring. Like, yeah, this show was bookended by a couple of nothing matches, that opener and then the curfew match, but the women's tag was awesome in its own way. And then the Kerry Erich Kent Patera match was really good and kind of leapt off the screen in an athletic way. So fun show, different. It's hard to really compare Wrestling at the Chase, St. Louis Wrestling, to any of the other territories that we've watched. It's a different feel, but I'm hoping we get more.
Yeah, it makes St. Louis have something that I enjoy.
Yeah.
And with that, we're going to call it a podcast. Make sure that you tell us your thoughts on this show, past shows we've done, anything you want. We love interacting with listeners, and the best way to interact with the show is via our Twitter at WrestleAtRandom. Same for Instagram. Also, our YouTube channel. If you want to watch the video version of this podcast, where it's not an audio version posted up there. It's the actual video of Adam and I talking to each other during this thing. You get little screen stills coming across your screen of the show we watched. That, if you want to watch that, and that helps us if you go over there and give us a subscribe at the YouTube channel. Even if you don't want to consume it that way, you're like, I listen to it, I don't need to see your face. That's totally fine too. But throw us a subscribe. It helps us work the algorithm so that other wrestling fans can find the show. And make sure you stay subscribed to the free feed via your podcatcher of choice, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever you're using. Stay subscribed, because when we do take a season break after 30 episodes, we will take a season break. You stay subscribed, because we will come back, and we always do come back with fresh content from the randomizer. And we have, during the entirety of that break, we will have nonstop coverage and additional episodes that you can only hear over in the bonus content that I've talked about throughout the show. So Wrestling at Random, you go to our Patreon, patreon.com/wrestlingatrandom, to support the show that way as well. And with that, we're calling it a podcast. Adam, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Sam Mushnick, and thank you, Larry Matisic. This was a very enjoyable 1 hour of pro wrestling. It flew by, and yeah, hopefully we'll get some more Wrestling at the Chase down the line. I'll also be interested to see if in the coming weeks, will the Ric Flair streak continue, or will there be something else new and exciting to watch? Can't wait to see.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.